Well, shalom, everyone, and welcome to our Shabbat night lesson. All right, let me welcome my sister in because she is the first one in line. Welcome to our Shabbat night lesson. We are in lesson 41, titled Phinehas. That's the Hebrew name, and in English, it's usually Pinchas, but his Hebrew name is Phinehas. So we're going to have an exciting lesson on tonight. I want to welcome you to our class. We want to remember to what? Study to show ourselves approved, workmen not ashamed of our hire, rightly dividing the words of truth. Let me turn off this music that I have been listening to. And we'll get ready for our class on tonight. Yes, we are going to be in Numbers. It's Bamidbar in Hebrew, but it's called Numbers because there's a lot of counting. And we're going to see where they did some counting and took a census. Remember, only the Lord can call for a census. Anyone else doing it without him telling them to do it would be out of order. And King David learned that as he took a census, and it was out of order because Jehovah had not instructed him to take a census. So we saw the pride of David coming forth as he took a census. And then right after that, plagues came because he was not supposed to do that. And so we're going to see that Jehovah called for um, a census of all the men aged 20 and above that were considered fighting men. And also, in doing that, take a census of the Levites. And so the Levite census was taken as well. And so then we're going to see a recapturing or recapsulating of the festival times that man was supposed to make sure they showed up in the presence of Jehovah, primarily at the tabernacle or later the temple, 3 times a year. And on those times, men were to gather and present themselves before Jehovah, our Elohim. And so we're going to touch on all those things. Matter of fact, it is 21 slides, so we got a lot we're going to cover. Some of it is repetition, but even in the repetition, we do line upon line, precept upon precept, so that we get the full value of all the Holy Spirit is trying to teach us in this word. And so we are excited about our lesson on tonight. And we're going to get started. Let's see, where are we? Yeah, it's about that time to get started. And so we're going to pray and then begin our session. Now, next week, we want to begin. My wife has reminded me that we're supposed to take communion in our classes. And so these cups have what we call the wafer and the juice, which Yeshua, our Messiah, instituted at the Passover meal prior to his death. And he told us, all reminded us that we were to do it often, always in remembrance of him. Well, the church has decided in some instances to do it once a month, some twice a year, whatever man has chosen to do, but that's not what the word said do. The word said do it often, and whenever you do it, it's in remembrance of what Yeshua has done for us. And so you can get them through, I don't want to do a commercial, but you can go to the online services and you can find these cups. They come as little as a pack of 6. I guess you could see that. Maybe it's kind of right for you, but it's a pack of 6. I learn how to do my screen because it doesn't do anything around me. Everything around me is blurry, just me. So I gotta do, there's something I should do to let my camera zoom around me as well. But so we're gonna start doing that next week. So you got a whole week to get you some. You can get them, as I say, in packs of 6 for about, I think it was like $6 or something like that. Or you can get a bigger pack of 50 because it's, once again, doing it often in remembrance of him. So you could do it whenever you desire to do it at home. I know I was raised in the Catholic Church, it's done at every Mass. And so we did it going to Catholic school. We did it every day at school. But of course, you had to have not eaten. Back when I was in school, I don't know how it is now, but when I was in school, you would have had to fast it. We wasn't doing that because we were eating before we went to school. And matter of fact, they took roll to see who was there in church, in the Mass. And so you had to get there, no matter what the weather, you had to get there in time to have a Mass every day of school. And so we understood in the Catholic Church the value of taking it, just as the word says, often, always in remembrance of Yeshua HaMashiach and what he has done for us. So my wife said, now, you know, we're supposed to be doing that. And I said, you are absolutely right. There's some other things we should be doing that we will incorporate next time. But get those and be ready. If not, you can just take maybe something grape juice you set aside for that. But we don't want it to be just necessary, ordinary, but something you kind of set aside for that purpose and then try to stick to that. Because you can do, if you were going to do a cracker, you would maybe do a matzah cracker and then some grape juice and just set it aside for the purpose of joining us as we give thanks to Yeshua HaMashiach for all he has done for us. So, with that, let us pray and get ready for our session. Jehovah our Elohim, we bless you for this day. This is the day that you have made. We rejoice, we are glad in it. We thank you for the Ruach HaKodesh, your Holy Spirit that comes to guide us through our lesson. And we thank you, Holy Spirit, for opening our hearts and minds to receive all that you will reveal to us tonight in this word. And it's in the name of Yeshua Mashiach we pray. Amen. With that, let's get to our shared screen and begin our lesson because, like I say, we have a lot of slides to get through on tonight. This is Shabbat, right? Shabbat begins at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday. So remember, Shabbat was made for man, not man for Shabbat, but it is something that the scriptures, specifically the Torah, which is the foundation of all scripture, admonishes us to honor this Shabbat. So with that, let's get to our slide, slow presentation, and our screen. Okay, here we are. So we're going to be in lesson 41, title Phinehas. Man, we only got 11 more lessons and we'll be done for the year. And so, interesting. A whole year has gone by. It's amazing because it seems like we just started with Genesis and now here we are on lesson 41. Next week, we'll have 2 lessons. because they combine those two lessons that will talk once again about the possibility of dividing the land when that happens, and then the journeys of the children of Israel up until the point that they are located right outside the Jordan River, looking across the river. It's not like a river as we think. You can throw a rock from one side to the other. So um, it's fascinating to see. We even took a little what they call that. It's almost like a toboggan, but anyway, it was like a little rafting, river rafting, because it's flowing, always moving from the North Sea of Galilee and above that all the way down to the Dead Sea. And so we did river rafting on the Jordan. Amazing. Because we think of this river and we think of big river like the Mississippi River. No, it's not, it's not like that at all. But the significance of what the Creator has given us, we honor that. So, in our lesson, we're going to touch on different things on the outline. First part of our lesson is going to be talking once again about where we left off last week, which was where Phinehas, who is the grandson of Aharon or Aaron, takes a spear because the Midianite women and the Moabite women had gathered themselves together under the instructions that they were given from Balak and Balaam, and seduced the men and had them getting involved in eating sacrifices to Baal and other false deities. And so they were enticed by these women, went and ate of the sacrifices that were given to the false gods of the Midianites and the Moabites. And the anger is said of Jehovah, which is basically, when it says that, it's just giving man a way to understand the seriousness of sin. However, sin brings about consequences. And the consequence for this behavior had already been told to the children of Israel by Jehovah if they would do something like that. They should have learned from the golden calf and other times of disobedience, but they didn't. And we might get into that a little bit as we go, because for some of the men, we understand their time was almost up. Because Jehovah said no man of fighting age from 20 and above was going to what? Go into the promised land because of the sin that they did of refusing to go in and take the land. And so they could have thought they ain't got nothing to lose, but they're going to enjoy themselves. Their time was, thought they were right at the Jordan. And so that could be part of it. But the basic thing is that we are always enticed by sin. But it's incumbent upon us to fight that. And we're going to talk about some scriptures from the Brit Hadash or the New Testament tonight that deal with that. And that is that temptation is always there and set before us. But the scriptures let us know that there is no temptation that is what? New to us or different than the temptations that all men are have to deal with. But we have been given a word, and we are supposed to do what Yeshua taught us when he was in the wilderness, and that is use the word to fight off all that the adversary will bring against us. And so this lesson, even though Phinehas took the spear in last week and killed both this leader of the Simeonites or of the tribe of Simeon and this woman who was a princess of the Midianites. And so Jehovah then will establish a covenant of peace with Phinehas to let everybody know, don't mess with them, because if you kill one of the leaders of the tribe of Simeon, of course, there's relatives, there's brothers, sisters, uncles, fathers that are going to come for you. But Jehovah let the people know, I have established a covenant of peace with Phinehas, and no one is going to come near him to harm him. You're not coming near him to harm him. So if he come up in your head, then Jehovah's going to deal with you. So that kind of brings us to where we are this week as we study what happened to Phinehas. Then we're going to get into the census count that Jehovah told, not Aaron, but Moshe and Eleazar to take. Then we're going to get into the third part of our session, which talks about the end of the census and the daughters of Zelophehad. And then in the fourth part of our session, Jehovah is going to tell Moses, go to this high place and you'll be able to look out over the Jordan and see the land of Israel, because you're not going in. Reminds him of that again. But he didn't take Moses immediately, as the whole book of Deuteronomy is Moses' final discussions and lessons for the children of Israel. Then in the fifth part of our session, we're going to talk about the designated times once again that we're all supposed to gather in the name of Jehovah. And then in the sixth part of our lesson, we're going to talk about the final three areas of Moedim, or appointed times of Jehovah. And in the seventh part, we will get to what happens at the end of Sukkot, which is a special time. And it's basically when the believers, when I say, I'm talking about Messianic believers that follow the Torah, come together and make sure that they start the lessons of, beginning with Genesis, the 52 lessons. Now, for the people, they would gather, and on the eighth day, they would read the whole, keep reading the Torah as they did in the time of Ezra. They would keep reading the Torah for that whole day and into the next day. But now we use that day to really affirm the start of the process of Torah studies beginning in Genesis. So we got the whole year to go through 52 lessons once again. So let's get into our lesson. I think I took up a little bit of time with that, and we need to get into this lesson. Now, we have this slide, which deals, once again, there's going to be a census. So we have all the tribes under the direction of Moshe and Eleazar, and who is the high priest, because Aharon has died, and they're going to take a census of all the people. And so also they're going to take a census of the Levites, who are, you see them immediately adjacent to the courtyard and the tabernacle. And so we put this slide back up so that we'll remember that there were three tribes in the east, three in the south, three in the north, and three in the west. And so the entrance to the courtyard was in the east, and these Levites, which would be Moshe, Aharon, and their group, would be at the entrance to guard the entrance so no one would enter. With that, we're going to get into some of the, oh, don't tell me. All right, so we're going to get into these scriptures from the Brit Hadashah, or the New Testament, where it kind of points out the aspect of what took place last week with Phinehas. And we find here in John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, where Yeshua made a whip from cords and drove them all out of the temple grounds, the sheep and cattle as well. So we know that there's a big, huge courtyard surrounding the temple where the area of sacrifices, where the area was. So it's kind of similar to this slide in that here is the temple, and around the temple was the area for the sacrifices as well. Then there was what was called the outer courtyard, which in this area, which would be where the people would gather before they could enter into the area adjacent to the courtyard of the priests. And so the priests would be in this area, and then there would be an area for the Hebrew men outside of the courtyard, and then on the other side of that would be the courtyard of the Gentiles. Well, here is a courtyard of all the other tribes as they surrounded the tabernacle. But that didn't happen when the temple was standing. And so it was in that area, the area of the common man. And when I say common, the men and the women that would gather that were not of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and so on, they would gather in the outer courtyard, and that is where the animals were being sold. And so Yeshua says, since all of this was part of the temple, I should have put that other slide in there of what the temple looked like at the time of Yeshua, but that is where Yeshua was driving out the animals because they had begun to allow animals, because if you were for a far distance away and you had to come those 3 times a year, you had to come and present yourself before Jehovah. Then if you were too far away to drive animals and things like that, you would sell the animal, and then when you got to the temple, you would purchase another one, but it wasn't supposed to be inside of the outer courtyard. It should have been off the temple grounds completely. And so he says, he then knocks over the money changers' table, scattering their coins, and to the pigeon sellers, he said, get these things out of here. How dare you turn my father's house into a market? And then his Talmudim later recall that the Tanakh says, zeal for your house will devour me. We see that in Psalms 69, 8 through 10. It says, it could be in some translations 7, but in the translation I use is verse 8. For your sakes, he said, I suffer insults and shame covers my face. He says, I am estranged from my brothers, an alien to my mother's children, because zeal for your house is eating me up, and on me are falling the insults of those insulting you. So in this psalm, it is basically what Yeshua was referring to when he says, zeal for your house has devoured me. So it wasn't just something off the top of his head, but he was quoting scripture so that those who saw it, especially the Pharisees, Sadducees, and those who knew scripture would understand what he was saying. Of course, he said even more than that, but that's what we're going to concentrate on today. Then we look at 1 Corinthians, and it says, chapter 6, verses 15 through 20. And it says, don't you know, Shalom teaching the church at Corinth says, don't you know that your bodies are parts of the Messiah? So, am I to take parts of the Messiah and make them parts of a prostitute? So, in our lesson, we saw where the women prostitutes came and took the hearts of men. So Shaul is telling them, in this particular case, guard your bodies and your minds so that you don't sin against your flesh, which is what the men did in this situation of what happened with the Moabites and the Midianites. Shaul says, heaven forbid. Don't you know that a man who joins himself to a prostitute becomes physically one with her? For the Tanakh says the two will become one flesh. But the person who is joined to the Lord is one spirit. So now your spirit man should overrule your tendency to want to sin sexually. He says, run from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits, is outside the body. But the fornicator sins against his own body. Or don't you know that your body is a temple of the Ruach HaKodesh who lives inside you, whom you received from God? The fact is, you don't belong to yourself, for you were bought at a price, so use your bodies to glorify God. This is what the men had violated and brought about death, which we're going to read a little bit more about the plague today, that killed over 24,000 men that were killed because of a plague that they brought upon themselves by sinning with the women and the sacrifices to Baal. Then we look at Matthew chapter 4, verses 8 to 10, and it says, Yeshua says, in his story of what happened when he was in the wilderness, once more the adversary, which that word basically is the name we use to call the devil, Satan, took him up to the summit of a very high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in all their glory. So he showed him in a vision all the kingdoms of the world. And when he showed him the kingdoms of the world, it was the palaces and all those things that could be his. And then he said to him, all this I will give you if you will bow down and worship me. So it reminds us that the prince of this world will always try to entice you based on some aspect of pride, flesh, sinning in the body with someone else, which is fleshly sin along with spiritual idolatry. Now you're letting your flesh completely rule you. And then he says, showing that he had authority over all of that. And then said, Yeshua says, away with you, Satan. And Yeshua told him, for the Tanakh says, worship Jehovah your Elohim and serve only him. And so this is a reminder of what our lesson concerning Phinehas is getting us to think in these manners, and that is the zeal, even though Phinehas killed someone, that was acceptable in this instance only by Jehovah, because he then gave him the covenant of peace. But we're not to take it upon ourselves to go out and kill anyone, because that is not what the peace that we're supposed to bring to anyone else. So with that, let's get into the first part of our session, where Jehovah, verse 10, chapter 25, we're going to go all the way to 26, verse 4 in the first part of our session. Jehovah said to Moshe, Phinehas, which it says here, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aharon the Kohen, has deflected my anger from the people of Israel by being as zealous as I am, so that I didn't destruct them in my own zeal. So in other words, you're worshiping what I told you you shouldn't, and I told you the penalty. So you brought that on yourself. But because of what Phinehas did, mercy and grace is going to intercede, and I'm going to stop from killing everyone. Because the people that were doing it, as we know, was in leadership. He goes on and says, therefore say to the people, I am giving him my covenant of shalom or peace, making a covenant with him and his descendants after him, that the office of Kohen or priest or the high priest will be theirs forever. This is because he was zealous on behalf of his Elohim and made atonement for the people of Israel. Verse 14, the name of the man from Israel who was killed or put to death with the woman from Midian was Zimri, the son of Salu, leader of one of the clans from the tribe of Shimon or Simeon. So once again, this leader was flaunting this sin in front of the people as he took her into his tent. The name of the woman from Midian who was killed was Cosbi, the daughter of Zur, and he was head of the people in one of the clans of Midian. So what Balaam had told them was, you have to get the people to sin against their God. Because as long as they're under the protection of Jehovah, their Elohim, there is nothing you can do to them. But if you get them to turn away from him, then his arms of protection, he will pull back and we can defeat them. And we will cause them to fight among themselves, which is what they would have done by killing one of the leaders of the tribe of Simeon. Then Jehovah said to Moshe, verse 16, treat the Midianim or the Midianites as enemies and attack them, because they are treating you as enemies by the trickery they used to deceive you in the Peor incident and in the affair of their sister Cosbi, the daughter of the leader from Midian, the woman who was killed on the day of the plague in the Peor incident after the plague. Jehovah said to Moshe and Eleazar, the son of Aharon the priest, then take a census of the assembly of the people of Israel 20 years old and over. Once again, Jehovah said, take the census by their ancestral clans, all who are subject to military service in Israel. Moshe and Eleazar the Kohen spoke with them on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho, explaining, those 20 years old and over who came out of the land of Egypt, as Jehovah ordered Moshe and the people of Israel. So he took the census of the fighting men. Remember, he took a census as they were leaving Mount Sinai and said how many there were. There were over 600, and I think 601,000 fighting men. Well, he told them none of you will go into the land. And so he's now taking a census to remind the people not only of the fact that those who disobeyed him to that degree were dead, but as you go in the fight, if you know the number, then when another census is taken, you will see. In this case, we're going to find out that the number of males who died along with their wives were almost the same as the number of males that were born during this 40-year period of wandering in the wilderness. And so even as these fighting men were dying, Jehovah was replenishing the number. We'll notice that some tribes who didn't engage in some of the sins that the plagues caused to kill some of the people, numbers increased. And those that were involved in some of the plagues that caused some of the behavior that caused the plagues, their numbers decreased. Let's go on. Chapter 26. The census results began with Reuben once again. So now we're going to go and just try to deal with the numbers so that we don't have to get so repetitious about these things. So in the tribe of Reuben, we see that there were now 43,730. Then we have well, it goes on to explain, so we do want to cover that. The sons of Palu, Eliab, and the sons of Eliab, Namuel, Datan, and Abiram. Remember, they were killed in the situation of Korah and his rebellion. The earth swallowed them up. These are the same Datan and Abiram, men of reputation in the community, who rebelled against Moshe and Aharon, and the earth swallowed them up together with Korah when that group died, and the fire consumed 250 men and they became a warning sign. However, it points out, because we're going to see this later, the sons of Korah, the sons of this rebellious Levite, did not participate, were not around his tent, moved away as Moses told them to do, and were not swallowed up. Then we get into the descendants of Simeon. The descendants of Simeon now were 22,200. All right, then we're going to get into the families of Gad. Remember, these are the 12 sons of Jacob. Those counted were 40,500. Next were the sons of Judah, the sons of Judah, and it was 76,500. So we know by looking at that number, and if we compare that with the number as we left the land of, at Mount Sinai, we would see that that number increased a bit. Then we have Issachar, 64,300. Then Zebulun. Each one of these, remember, is one of the 12 sons of Jacob, with the exception of the Levites, who were not counted. So there would have been 11. However, for Joseph, Manasseh his son and Ephraim his son were both added to the 12 of the other 11 sons. And so we still end up with 12 tribes. And so we have Zebulun, 60,500. Then we're going to get into Manasseh first, and we'll see that from the families of Manasseh, there are now 52,700. Then we get to Ephraim, and we see that from Ephraim, there are 32,500. Then we go to Benjamin, and of the tribe of Benjamin, there were 45,600. Then we go to the descendants of Dan, 64,400. Then the descendants of Asher, 53,400. Then the descendants of Naphtali, 45,400. Of these 12 tribes, now we have a total of 601,730 fighting men. And so this census was taken to show them, remind them of the number of people that happened 38 or 39, 40 years ago when they left Sinai, with the number of fighting men there were now, and there were still 601,730. But all the men are now dead that were told, you will not enter the land. Now we're going to go to the third part of our session, which will talk about the dividing of the land. Jehovah said to Moshe, the land is to be parceled out among these as a possession to be inherited, according to the number of their names. To those families with more persons, you ought to give a greater inheritance. And to those with fewer, you ought to give a smaller inheritance. Each family's inheritance is to be given according to the number counted in it. However, the land is to be awarded by lot. So now it wasn't Reuben is necessarily going to be first. They were going to cast lots, which basically states that Jehovah will determine who will get what portion and where. They will inherit according to the names of the tribes of their ancestors. But the inheritance is to be parceled out by lot between the families, and more family with more and those with fewer. Those counted among the Levites. Now, you also remember they counted the Levites by the families were 23,000 now total Levites who were not necessarily killed because they were not of the fighting men. So we'll see that number pretty much stayed the same or increased a little bit, because no land for inheritance was given to them among the people of it. So when it says that there were, we will find out in the book, well, you got to get into the book of Joshua, But Joshua divided the land up, and there were cities called cities of refuge where the Levites would be divided up and sent to those cities. And those cities were around the land, and those cities were designed to be places where the Levites would establish their residence, but their inheritance, remember, was going to be taken care of by Jehovah through tithes and offerings of the people. And so, as we complete chapter 26, these are the ones counted by Moshe and Eleazar, priests, who took a census of the people of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. Remember, they could see a city in the distance called Jericho because it ain't that far across the Jordan. Not only could they see Jericho, but Jericho could see them. Because Jehovah had said, but there was not a man among them who had also been included in the census of Moshe and Aaron the priest when they enumerated the people of Israel in the Sinai desert. So they were leaving Mount Sinai, they took another census, which is basically the beginning of the book of Bamidbar, which is titled Numbers. Because Jehovah had said of them, they will surely die in the desert. So there was not left even one of them except Caleb, the son of Phinehas, and Yahashua, the son of Nun. So Caleb and Joshua were the only ones left of those men of fighting age from the age of 20 and older. Chapter 27 starts with the whole situation with the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hefer, the son of Galad, the son of Maher, the son of Manasseh, of the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, and they approached. Okay, so remember, Joseph's portion was divided in two between Manasseh and Ephraim, but the Levites were taken out. So we still end up with 12 because the Levites were taken out and given a special designation, which was similar to what would have happened with the firstborn male of every tribe. Verse 2, they stood in front of Moshe, Eleazar the priest, and the leaders and the whole community at the entrance to the tent of meeting and said, our father died in the desert. He wasn't part of the group who assembled themselves to rebel against Jehovah in Korach's group, but he died of his own sin, and he had no son. So he didn't participate with Korach, but he was of the fighting age of the men who were told they're not going to enter the land. Why should the name of our father be eliminated from his family just because he didn't have a son? Give us property to possess along with the brothers of our father. So he didn't have any sons. So there was no one to pass on the land rights that his family would possess because he didn't have sons, and daughters weren't counted prior to this as one who was going to carry on the name of that particular patriarch. So then we go on. Jehovah answered Moshe. So Moses immediately goes to Jehovah inside the tent and asks him what should he do about that, because he didn't know what to do. The daughters of Zelophehad are right in what they say, said Jehovah. You must give them property to be inherited along with that of their father's brothers. Have what their father would have inherited passed to them. Moreover, say to the people of Israel, if a man dies and does not have a son, you ought to have his inheritance passed to his daughter. If he doesn't have a daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. If his father doesn't have brothers, give his inheritance to the closest relative in his family, and he will possess it. This will be a standard for judgment to be used by the people of Israel as Adonai or Jehovah ordered Moshe. Jehovah then says to Moshe, climb this mountain in the Avarim range and look out at the land which I have given the people of Israel. After you have seen it, you too will be gathered to your people, just as Aharon, your brother, was gathered. Because in the Zin desert, where the community was disputing with me, you rebelled against my order to uphold my holiness. Remember, that means set apart by means of the water, with them looking on. And this was the incident at Marivat Kadesh Spring in the Zin desert. So Moshe said to Jehovah, then he says to Jehovah, we're in the fourth part of our session and completing that, let Jehovah, Elohim of the spirits of all human beings, appoint a man to be over the community, to go out and come in ahead of them, to lead them out and bring them in, so that Jehovah's community will not be like a sheep without a shepherd. So Moshe says, show me who's going to take its place. It's not going to fall. He had two sons. But this responsibility, since Jehovah chose him, was not his to pass on to his sons. And so he's saying, who will take my place as the leader of the people, basically saying the leader of the people outside of the priests. Then Jehovah says to Moshe, take Yahashua, the son of Nun, a spiritual man, and lay your hand on him. Put him in front of Eleazar the priest and the whole community and commission him in their sight. Delegate to him some of your authority so that the entire community of Israel will obey him. He is to present himself to Eleazar the Kohen, or the high priest, who is to find out by means of the Urim what Jehovah's will is for Yahashua's decision. You see the difference between what Moshe did was go directly to Jehovah and talk. Joshua does not have that. He's not been given that right by Jehovah. So he will consult along with the priest, and the decision will come through the Urim and the Thummim. That is part of the ephod that is worn by the high priest. He can't go directly inside the tabernacle and the tent of meeting, to ask Jehovah what to do, as was allowed for Moshe. Then at his word, they will go out, and at his word, they will come in. So he will consult you. I will speak to you two, and then you make decisions. But it will be him that will say what to do. He is the leader of the children of Israel, specifically the fighting men and all those leaders of the community. Moshe, verse 22, did as Jehovah had ordered him. He took Yahashua, put him before Eleazar the priest and the whole community, laid his hands on him. Remember, he would go up to a high place and do this, and commissioned him as Jehovah had said through Moshe. Fifth part of our session, chapter 28, verses 1 through 5 is going to go into, once again, the Moedim, or the appointed times that were explained to us greatly in Leviticus, and now he's explaining it to us once again in Bamidbar, or Numbers. Jehovah said also, it's reminded because remember what just happened with Baal and Balaam. Balak and Balaam understood sacrificing animals to his false deity. So the children of Israel kind of understood, because of the plague, what Jehovah revealed, what had transpired. But now he's going back and telling them, this is the way you are to make offerings to me. Don't deal with whatever Balak was doing, because he's gonna deal with Balak and all of the others. But understand, this is how you are to reference me in the sacrifices. He goes on to say, give an order to the people of Israel, tell them, you ought to take care to offer me at the proper time the food presented to me as offerings made by fire, providing a fragrant aroma for me. Tell them, this is the offering made by fire that you ought to bring to Jehovah, male lambs in their first year and without defect, 2 daily as a regular burnt offering. Offer the one lamb in the morning and the other lamb at dusk. So what would happen is the shofar would blow, announcing the morning sacrifice. Then the shofar would blow again and announcing the evening sacrifice. And this practice was continued when the temple was built by Solomon. This was part of the letting the people know what was transpiring. The blowing of the shofar and the trumpets would tell the people that it's time for the morning sacrifice, which would take place at sunrise, which was right around 6. And then right around 6 p.m. or a little later at dusk would be the blowing and the offering of the evening sacrifice. He says, then bring along with that 2 quarts. Do it just like I tell you. Bring along 2 quarts of fine flour as a grain offering, mixed with 1/4 quart of olive oil from pressed olive. It is the regular burnt offering, the same as what offered on Mount Sinai to give a fragrant aroma, an offering made by fire for Jehovah. Its drink offering is to be 1/4 hin for one lamb. In the holy place, you are to pour out a drink offering of intoxicating liquor to Jehovah. The other lamb you are to present at dusk, presented with the same kind of grain offering and drink offering as in the morning. It is an offering made by fire with a fragrant aroma for Jehovah. On Shabbat, offer 2 male lambs in their first year and without defect, and 1 gallon of fine flour as a grain offering, mixed with olive oil and its drink offering. This is the burnt offering for every Shabbat, but it's in addition to the morning offering and the evening offering. On Shabbat, you are to offer 2 additional, two additional lambs that would be offered in the morning on Shabbat, Shabbat being a special time. We go on. At each Rosh Hashanah, which is new moon, you are to present a burnt offering to Jehovah consisting of 2 young bulls, 1 ram, and 7 male lambs in their first year and without defect. So remember, each month has a new moon with 6 quarts of fine flour mixed with olive oil as a grain offering for the 1 ram, and 2 quarts of fine flour mixed with olive oil as a grain offering for each lamb. This will be the burnt offering, giving a fragrant aroma, an offering made by fire for Jehovah. Their drink offerings will be 2 quarts of wine for a bull, 1 1/3 quarts for the ram, and 1 quart for each lamb. This is the burnt offering for every Rosh Hashanah or new moon throughout the months of the year. Also, a male goat is to be offered as a sin offering to Jehovah in addition to the regular burnt offering and its drink offering. So we're going through now what offerings were to take place, how they were supposed to do it, and what they were supposed to do along with the burnt offerings of this particular set apart days. Every month there is a Rosh Hashanah. We go on. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, is Jehovah's Pesach, Passover. On the 15th day of the month is to be a feast. Matzah is to be eaten for 7 days. The first day is to be a holy convocation. Do not do any kind of ordinary work, but present an offering made by fire, a burnt offering to Jehovah, consisting of 2 young bulls, 1 ram, and 7 male lambs in their first year. They are to be without defect for you. With their grain offerings, fine flour mixed with olive oil, offer 6 quarts for a bull, 4 quarts for the ram. Remember, you took portions of that. The other part of it would be given to the priest to eat as especially holy. This is to go along with what is the regular burnt offering. In this fashion, you are to offer daily for 7 days the food of the offering made by fire, making a fragrant aroma for Jehovah. You're doing that each day, what he has told you to offer up here, 2 young bulls and 1 ram, each day of the 7 days. Always in line with the morning and evening sacrifice. In this fashion, you ought to offer daily for 7 days the food of the offering made by fire, making a fragrant aroma for Jehovah. It is to be offered in addition to the regular burnt offering and its drink offering. On the 7th day, you ought to have a holy convocation. Do not do any kind of ordinary work. So the 1st and 7th days of the festival of unleavened bread are considered special days, set apart convocations. On the 1st day of first fruits, when you bring a new grain offering to Jehovah in your feast of Shavuot, remember this is 50 days after the waving of the sheep around during the festival of matzah, or the festival of unleavened bread. You ought to have a holy convocation, do not do any kind of work, but present a burnt offering as a fragrant aroma for Jehovah, consisting of 2 young bulls, 1 ram, 7 male lambs in their first year, and their grain offering. Fine flour mixed with olive oil, 6 quarts for each bull, 4 quarts for each ram, and 2 quarts for each of the 7 lambs, plus a male ram making atonement for you. You are to offer these in addition to the regular burnt offering and its offering. They are to be without defect for you with their drink offerings. We complete the 6th part of our session in the 7th month. So that was usually Shavuot is 1 or 2 days based upon the separation from different continents. So they do it on 2 days to make sure everyone gets an understanding of what is transpiring and no one misses. So in the 7th month, remember the 1st month is the month of Passover or Pesach. In the 7th month, so you start counting with the new moon of Pesach. That's the 1st day. In the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you ought to have a holy convocation. Do not do any kind of ordinary work. It's a day for blowing the shofar for you. This is the what? 7th month, 1st day of the month. Specifically, it's called the Day of Trumpets, where it's acknowledging what is getting ready to transpire, which we'll find out later on, the Day of Atonement. Also, this is the time when the Jubilee would be announced. So this day is very special and is really called the Day of Yom Teruah, or the blowing of the trumpets. Okay, so then you do 7 male lambs in their first year without defect, with their grain offering consisting of fine flour mixed with olive oil, 6 quarts for the bull, 4 quarts for the ram, and 2 quarts for each of the 7 lambs. Also, 1 male goat as a sin offering to make atonement for you. This is in addition to the burnt offering for Rosh Hashanah and its grain offering. So you see, this day is even made more special with this additional sacrifice added to all that you would do on the regular new moon. For this particular month, you add to it what we have just talked about. Then it goes on, the regular burnt offering with its grain offering and their drink offerings according to the rule for them. So the morning and evening offering, you're going to still blow the trumpets and acknowledge that they are taking place. This will be a fragrant aroma, an offering made by fire to Jehovah. Then on the 10th day of this 7th month, you ought to have a holy convocation. You ought to deny yourselves and you are not to do any kind of work. This is the day of atonement, Yom Kippur. So on this day, it's usually done fasting. All the other festivals are festive. But on this particular day, because we're dealing with what happens in terms of the high priest going behind the curtain and atoning for the sins of Israel for the whole year, for himself first, his family, and then for all the people, then this day is the day where you fast. All the other days are festive. You are to present a burnt offering to Jehovah to make a fragrant aroma, one young bull, one ram, and 7 male lambs in their first year. They are to be without defect for you, with their grain offering. Fine flour mixed with olive oil, 6 quarts for the bull, 4 quarts for the one ram, and 2 quarts for each of the 7 lambs. Also, 1 male goat as a sin offering, in addition to the sin offering for atonement and the regular burnt offerings with this grain offering and their drink offering. So it's important to see this particular part because the priest is going to go behind the curtain with the blood of the animal for the forgiveness of the sins or to atone for the sin of the people, in addition to everything else that's going on. The way the trumpets blow will let the people know exactly what's going on, but they will blow. Then on the 15th day of the 7th month, you ought to have a holy convocation. Remember, once again, the first day of the month is the new moon. You are not to do any kind of ordinary work, and you ought to observe a feast to Jehovah 7 days. You ought to present up, so there are 7 days for Sukkot, or this festival of booths. You ought to present a burnt offering, an offering made by fire. Now, this is the end of the, not the end of the year, but the end of the harvesting season. And so a lot is added to it. You're going to give 13 young bulls on the first day. Then on the second day, 12 young bulls, along with everything else. On the third day, 11 young bulls, along with everything else. On the fourth day, 10 bulls, along with everything else. On the fifth day, 9 bulls, along with everything. Everything else pretty much remains the same, except for the number of bulls. On the 6th day, 8 bulls. On the 7th day, 7 bulls. So everything else makes the same, but that's in addition to the morning and evening sacrifice. So they're sacrificing all these animals, and it's very stiff. There is a lot of meat along with the vegetables and everything else because of the amount of animals that they're sacrificing. And the people rejoice in this because they get a chance to be festive, sing, dance, and on the 7th day they do that. However, on the 8th day of Sukkot, you ought to have a festive assembly. So you're going to get all the people together, and you are not to do any kind of ordinary work, but you are to present a burnt offering, an offering made by fire, giving a fragrant aroma to Jehovah. 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 male lambs in their first year without defect, with the grain and drink offerings for the bull, the ram, and the lambs, according to their number. In keeping with the rule, also 1 male goat as a sin offering. This is on the 8th day, in addition to the regular burnt offering with this grain and drink offerings. You are to offer these to Jehovah at your designated times, the times you were told to do it. In addition to your vows and vows, you can do those all during the year. But on these days, this is what's going to happen. Moshe told the people of Israel everything, chapter 30, verse 1, just as Jehovah had ordered him to do. So we see that Jehovah now gives a reminder of what sacrifices, what times, what they're supposed to do exactly as they're supposed to do it, because they just dealt with the whole situation with Balak rather, and Balaam. So this is the perfect time to institute a reminder to the people. Also, he told Moshe that your days are numbered. So Moshe wants to make sure the people understand what they are supposed to do and understand before his departure. With that, let's get out of our shared screen and see if we have any questions. The prophet has joined us, Linda, but I don't see any questions. Last chance to ask any question that you might have before we dismiss for this lesson. All right. With that, let us give the priestly blessing and depart until next week. Remember, there will be 2 lessons combined together. They're short, but when you combine them, you get a lot more information about what is getting ready to happen, because we're getting ready to go into Deuteronomy. Now, may Jehovah bless you and keep you from Numbers 6, verses 24 through 26. May Jehovah make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May Jehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And with that, we say shalom. I will see you next Shabbat. Shalom.